The entire village thought she was cursed. They were wrong. She wasn't cursed, she was chosen. And the towering field of golden millet held a language only she could understand. The silent world of Precious in the secluded village of Camelot, nestled between rolling hills, lived a young girl named Precious. Since a childhood illness, her world had been one of profound silence. She could hear neither the laughter of the other children nor the songs of the morning birds. Her existence was a quiet painting, observed from behind a pane of glass. While others communicated with lively shouts and chatter, Precious expressed herself through the gentle language of her hands and the profound depth of her eyes, which seemed to hold the wisdom of the ancient skies. She often felt a lonely disconnect from the vibrant life of the village, a spectator to a play she could not hear. Her only true sanctuary was the vast sea of golden millet that surrounded Camelot. The stalks stood taller than any man, a fortress of life that rustled and swayed with a secret energy. Here, in the embrace of the field, Precious did not feel her silence was a lack, but rather a different kind of presence. She would spend hours tracing the lines on the broad leaves, feeling the sun-warmed earth beneath her bare feet, and watching the endless dance of the stalks as they were caressed by unseen forces. It was in this golden solitude that she first began to feel the world, rather than just see it. The first whisper one afternoon, as a particularly gentle breeze swept across the valley, Precious sat with her back against a sun-baked rock at the field's edge. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to better feel the sun on her eyelids and the faint vibration of the wind on her skin. As the air moved, it flowed through the dense millet, and a new sensation bloomed within her. It was a soft, rhythmic rustling that traveled through the ground and up through the soles of her feet, a tactile murmur that spoke directly to her bones. It was unlike the jarring, unpredictable vibrations of the village. This was a pattern, a deliberate cadence. Her heart began to race, not with fear, but with a dawning, incredible understanding. This was not random noise. She placed her palms flat on the dry soil, and as the next gust came, she felt the distinct message. A slow, heavy sway that traveled through the stalks in a unified wave. The movement felt like a deep, weary sigh from the earth itself. Later that evening, long before any cloud marred the perfect azure sky, the first heavy drops of an unexpected summer rain began to fall. Precious, safe inside her home, knew with a certainty that shook her very soul that the field had told her it was coming. The language of sway from that day forward, Precious's life gained a new purpose. She became a diligent student of the millet field, visiting at all hours to learn its language. She discovered that the whispers were not a single note but a complex symphony of movement. A quick, skittish shiver running through the upper stalks spoke of a coming dry, hot wind from the east. A deep, groaning sway from the roots upward warned of a prolonged humidity that could threaten the crop with mold. She learned to distinguish between the gentle gossip of a midday zephyr and the urgent, sweeping declarations of a changing weather front. She began to keep an intricate journal, not with words, but with drawings. She sketched the patterns of the stalk's movements, swirls for whirlwinds, long, parallel lines for steady winds, and jagged, sharp lines for sudden gusts. She correlated these patterns with the weather that followed, and her predictions grew astonishingly accurate. Her silent world, once a barrier, had become her greatest asset. Without the distraction of sound, her entire being was focused on interpreting the subtle tactile and visual language of the wind, a language everyone else was too busy to notice. The skeptics of Camelot Precious, emboldened by her discoveries, tried to share her knowledge. She would approach the farmers, her father among them, and gesture urgently at the sky, then at the field, mimicking the specific sway that predicted a storm. At first, they smiled with patronizing pity, patting her head and mistaking her precise warnings for the simple anxieties of a mute child. "The sky is clear, little one," they would say, their voices muffled and meaningless to her, but their condescending tone was painfully clear. Her mother would gently lead her away, her own eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. The village elder, a pragmatic man named Kale, was the most vocal skeptic. He believed in the old ways, observing the animals and the color of the sunset, and saw Precious's behavior as a distraction. After she frantically tried to warn them of an approaching hailstorm, which they ignored, resulting in a damaged section of the crop, Kale publicly declared her predictions to be bad luck. The villagers, superstitious and wary of what they didn't understand, began to shy away from her. Precious retreated back into her solitude, her heart heavy, the millet field once again becoming her only confidant. The proof in the rain, the true turning point came during the festival of the summer sun. The entire village was preparing for a grand celebration outdoors. The skies were a perfect, cloudless blue, and everyone was joyously setting up tables and decorations. All except Precious. She stood at the edge of the square, her face pale with dread. The millet had been whispering a desperate, urgent message all morning, a specific, low-frequency shudder she had come to associate with violent, sudden downpours. She ran to Kale, pulling on his tunic, her hands flying in a desperate pantomime of rain and wind. Annoyed, Kale was about to shoo her away when Precious's father intervened. He saw the raw, unfeigned terror in his daughter's eyes, a look he had not seen since her illness. Something in him shifted. "Elder," he said, his voice uncharacteristically firm, "my daughter has never sought to harm us. What if we are the fools who cannot listen?" Hesitantly, and amidst much grumbling, the festival was moved into the large barn. Just as the last table was dragged inside, the sky darkened ominously. With a deafening crack of thunder, the heavens opened, unleashing a torrential rain that would have ruined the festival completely. The villagers stood in stunned silence, looking from the deluge outside to the mute girl who had saved their celebration. The Wind Whisperer is born. The downpour washed away the villagers' skepticism as thoroughly as it cleansed the dusty streets. After the storm passed, a quiet awe settled over the community. They gathered around Precious, their expressions now filled with respect and a thirst for understanding. Kale, humbled, approached her and bowed his head slightly. "Precious," he said slowly, making sure she could read his lips. "The field, it speaks to you. Can you teach us?" And so, Precious's new role began. She was no longer the pitted mute girl. She was the Wind Whisperer of Camelot. She led the villagers to the millet field, not as a place of simple harvest, but as a living oracle. She would point to the stalks, demonstrating the different sways and rustles. She used her drawings to show the patterns. The farmers, whose lives depended on the whims of weather, became her most eager students. They learned to stop, to be still, and to truly watch the dance of the millet, beginning to discern the basic rhythms of its silent song. A deeper connection as Precious taught, her own connection to the millet deepened into something far more profound than simple weather prediction. She began to understand that the whispers were not just about the wind, but about the well-being of the plants themselves. A different, more frantic vibration signaled the arrival of burrowing insects at the roots. A lethargic, limp sway in the heat of a well-watered day indicated a different kind of thirst, one not for water but for specific nutrients in the soil. She guided the villagers accordingly. Instead of blanket pesticide use, they would treat only the specific areas the millet had indicated were infested. They began to rotate their crops and enrich the soil based on the plant's apparent needs, moving beyond simple observation into a form of active dialogue with their environment. The land began to flourish as never before. The millet stalks grew taller and stronger, their golden hue deeper and more vibrant, as if grateful for the attention and care they were finally receiving. The rhythm of the earth, the entire rhythm of village life, began to synchronize with the whispers of the millet. Planting, harvesting, irrigation, and even social events were planned according to the messages Precious interpreted. The frantic, unpredictable struggle against nature softened into a harmonious partnership. The villagers learned to respect the wind, not as a foe to be endured, but as a messenger and a vital part of the cycle of life. They built windbreaks that worked with the prevailing gusts, designed irrigation channels that followed the natural flow of the land, and found a new peace in their work. Children, following Precious's example, learned to read the signs of nature from a young age. They could predict afternoon showers by the flight of the dragonflies and knew the best time to fish by the way the water rippled. Camelot became a model of sustainability and harmony, all thanks to the silent girl who had taught them to listen to the world with more than just their ears. They had learned to feel the heartbeat of the earth itself. The fading whispers years passed, and Precious grew into a wise young woman, still the revered Wind Whisperer. But one season, a new anxiety gripped her. The whispers from the millet were changing. They became erratic, dissonant. The usual clear patterns of wind and health were muddled by a new, underlying vibration, a constant, faint tremble in the earth that was out of sync with the natural rhythms. The millet's song seemed stressed, confused. It spoke of a dryness that went deeper than the topsoil, of temperatures that remained unnaturally high long into the night. Precious's predictions became less reliable. A gentle sway she would have once interpreted as a sign of mild weather would be followed by a sudden, violent microstorm. The villagers, though still loyal, began to feel a thread of uncertainty. The ancient harmony was being disrupted by something they couldn't see or understand. Precious spent agonizing days and nights in the field, her hands pressed against the stalks, trying to decipher the new, alarming language of a world out of balance. The distant echo, the strange dissonance in the millet's whispers coincided with the arrival of strangers in Camelot that a team of researchers from a distant university, led by a renowned agricultural scientist named Dr. Aries Thorne, came to the valley. They had heard tales of the phenomenal crop yields and knew perfect weather predictions of this isolated village and were skeptical, attributing it to folklore or luck. They set up sophisticated equipment, weather stations, soil moisture sensors, and microphones to record the soundscape. Dr. Thorne, a man of data and logic, was particularly fascinated by the legend of the Wind Whisperer. He requested a meeting with Precious. He watched her intently as she walked through the field, her fingers lightly brushing the tips of the stalks, her eyes closed in concentration. He saw the villagers hang on her every gesture. To him, it was a fascinating cultural study, but he was certain there was a scientific principle underlying the myth. He was determined to find it. Clash of Worlds. Dr. Thorne attempted to explain his findings to the villagers, showing them graphs of atmospheric pressure and humidity readings. The villagers listened politely but were unmoved. They trusted Precious's felt knowledge, the language of the sway, more than they trusted the flashing numbers on a screen. Kale, now very old, spoke for them all. "Your machines tell us what is happening now, Doctor. Precious tells us what the Earth intends to do." Thorne was frustrated but also intrigued. He observed that the village's agricultural success was undeniable. He began to realize that Precious was perceiving subtle environmental cues, changes in air pressure, humidity, and soil conductivity, that his machines could only measure in isolation. She was synthesizing them into a predictive model through a profound, intuitive connection. He wasn't witnessing magic. He was witnessing a human being operating as a perfect biological sensor, integrated with her environment. The researchers' hypothesis. One evening, Dr. Thorne presented a new theory to his team. "We've been studying plant communication for years in labs," he said, "looking at chemical signals and root networks. But what if we've been missing a macro-level language? What if the entire field, as a collective, is communicating through its physical response to the environment? The way the stalks sway creates specific air currents. The sound of rustling isn't just noise. It could be a form of data transmission." He believed that Precious, in her silence, had subconsciously learned to decode this bioacoustic and kinesthetic language. She wasn't hearing words. She was feeling the complex physical output of the plant's reaction to impending weather and stress. His mission shifted from debunking a myth to validating a revolutionary scientific hypothesis, that a field of crops could function as a sensitive, distributed weather and health monitoring system. The unseen threat. While Thorne was lost in his theories, Precious's distress grew. The millet's whispers were now filled with a consistent, panicked vibration. She led Dr. Thorne and the village elders to a specific corner of the field where the stalks were noticeably paler and droopier. She pointed insistently at the ground. Thorne, finally understanding her urgency, had his team take soil samples. The lab results came back with alarming news. A contaminant was leaching into the aquifer from an old, abandoned mine in the distant hills, a threat no traditional observation could have detected so early. The millet, with its deep root system, had been the first to sense the poison deep within the earth. It wasn't just predicting weather, it was diagnosing the very health of the ecosystem. Precious's connection had revealed an existential threat invisible to both the naked eye and the researchers' initial scans. The scientific instruments had confirmed what the plants had already screamed through their roots and whispered through their stalks. A unified effort. The crisis united the village and the researchers completely. Dr. Thorn no longer saw a folk healer. He saw a partner with a unique and invaluable skill. Precious, in turn, saw in Thorn's technology a way to quantify and amplify the millet's warnings. Together, they formed a powerful alliance. Precious would use her sensitivity to identify problem areas, and Thorn's team would use their equipment to analyze the exact nature and source of the problem. They mapped the spread of the contaminant through the field based on the intensity of the millet's stressed signals. The villagers, under this guided direction, worked tirelessly to divert water sources, build containment barriers, and begin the slow process of phytoremediation, using the millet itself, which was now sacrificially drawing the toxins from the soil, to clean the land. It was a brutal but necessary sacrifice of that season's crop to save the future of the valley. The symphony of data. Dr. Thorn's team worked feverishly to create a translation device. They placed highly sensitive vibration sensors throughout the field, correlating the specific frequencies and patterns of the stalk's movements with the environmental data they collected. Slowly, a map began to emerge. A specific low-frequency rumble correlated with a drop in barometric pressure. A high-frequency shiver matched a rise in soil salinity. They were, in effect, creating a digital dictionary for the language Precious had always known. The machine could now provide early warnings, but it was Precious who provided the nuance, the context, the intuition that the raw data lacked. The combination was more powerful than either alone. The villagers could now see the whispers on a screen, a visual symphony of data that validated Precious's lifelong connection and made the abstract tangible for everyone. The cycle of healing. The fight to save the land was long and difficult. The contaminated section of the millet field had to be burned, a heartbreaking loss for the village. But from the ashes, a new understanding was born. They planted a new, resilient strain of millet, and Precious carefully monitored its whispers, ensuring the soil was truly healing. The connection between the people and their land was forged in fire, stronger and more respectful than ever before. Dr. Thorn documented the entire process, not just as an environmental case study, but as a groundbreaking paper on interdisciplinary knowledge systems. He argued that the future of ecology lay in combining advanced technology with traditional and intuitive knowledge, that science needed to learn to listen as well as measure. Camelot became a living laboratory for a new kind of environmental stewardship. The legacy of the Whisper Precious, though still young, knew her work was ensuring the village's future. She began to formally teach the children, using Dr. Thorn's visualizer to help them learn the patterns. She showed them how to feel the difference between a healthy rustle and a stressed shudder, how to care for the soil so the millet would sing a strong song. The legacy of the Wind Whisperer would not die with her but would be passed down, enriched now by scientific understanding. Kale, on his deathbed, smiled at Precious and placed an ancient, polished stone from the river into her hand, a traditional symbol of wisdom and permanence. "You did not just hear the wind, child," he said, his voice a frail whisper she felt more than heard. "You taught us to hear the future." His final words cemented her place not just as a weather reader, but as a visionary leader. The researcher's transformation. Dr. Aries Thorn prepared to leave Camelot, but he was a changed man. His mission had arrived, seeking to demystify a legend, and was leaving humbled and enlightened. He had come to prove a scientific principle and had instead discovered a new way of seeing the natural world. He promised to take the lessons of Camelot to the global scientific community, to advocate for approaches that respected both data and wisdom. His papers, co-authored in spirit with Precious, though she would never read them, would go on to influence a new generation of agroecologists. He named his new research initiative the Whispering Millet Project, dedicated to exploring the intersection of traditional ecological knowledge and modern science. He left Camelot not with just a set of data, but with a profound new purpose. A new harmony. Camelot settled into a new rhythm, a blend of the old and the new. The hum of Dr. Thorn's sensor nodes was now a part of the soundscape of the field, a gentle technological counterpoint to the natural rustle of the millet. The villagers consulted both the digital readouts in the small community center and Precious's intuitive interpretations. They had become masters of their environment, not through domination, but through profound listening and mutual respect. The millet harvest that year was the most abundant in living memory. The stalks were strong and healthy, their song a clear, confident whisper of vitality and balance. The village held a great feast, not just to celebrate the harvest, but to celebrate their resilience, their unity, and the girl who had bridged two worlds to save their home. The whisper goes global. News of Camelot's recovery and unique methods began to spread. Farmers from neighboring regions, themselves struggling with unpredictable weather and soil problems, traveled to learn from the Wind Whisperer. Precious, with the help of a translator provided by Dr. Thorne's Institute, taught them the basics of observing their own crops, of learning the specific language of their own land. The principles born in the millet fields of Camelot began to adapt to different crops and climates. The idea of listening to the field became a powerful metaphor for a more mindful, sustainable agriculture. Precious's silence had found a voice that resonated across the region, inspiring a movement towards re-establishing a deeper, more respectful connection with the earth. The internal shift for Precious, the external victory, was matched by a profound internal peace. The loneliness that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a sense of unshakable belonging. She was not an outcast. She was a vital channel, a translator between the human world and the natural one. Her muteness was no longer a disability, but the very key that had unlocked her unique gift. She would walk through the whispering gold, her hand trailing over the tops of the stalks, and feel a conversation flowing through her. It was a dialogue of gratitude and care. She had saved the millet, and in return, it had given her a purpose, a community, and a name. She was Precious, the bridge, the listener, the heart of Camelot. The next generation, a young girl named Lira, who also spoke little but observed much, began to follow Precious like a shadow. Precious saw her own childhood self in the girl's quiet intensity. She took Lira under her wing, teaching her the first lessons of the whisper. How to be still, how to feel the sun's direction on her skin, how to distinguish the feel of a leaf from a stalk. The legacy was being passed on, not through loud proclamations, but through quiet, patient mentorship. Lira proved to be a gifted student. Her sensitivity was different from Precious's. She was particularly attuned to the tiny insects that lived on the millet, sensing their presence through almost imperceptible changes in the plant's vibration. It was a new dialect in the language, showing that the whisper was ever evolving, with endless depths for new generations to discover. The constant conversation the years turned, and the conversation between the village and the field never ceased. It became woven into the very fabric of their culture. Their songs and stories were filled with references to the swaying language and the wise silence. They measured time not just by seasons, but by the specific tones of the millet's song, the planting whisper, the growing rustle, the harvest hum. The people of Camelot understood that they were not separate from nature but participants in a constant, dynamic dialogue. Their survival and prosperity depended on their ability to listen and respond with care and intelligence. They had learned that the earth is always speaking. One only needs the patience and the heart to understand its language. The distant challenge. One day, a formal letter arrived, bearing the seal of a global agricultural consortium. They had heard of the Camelot method and wanted to implement it on a massive, industrial scale. They proposed replacing vast, diverse farmlands with monolithic fields of bioengineered millet, all monitored by thousands of automated sensors based on Dr. Thorne's designs. They saw efficiency and profit. Precious and the village council were horrified. This was the opposite of everything they stood for. The consortium's plan was not about listening and partnership. It was about exploitation and control on a grand scale. It sought to extract the language of the millet without understanding its soul. They realized their discovery was facing its greatest threat, being co-opted and stripped of its meaning. A stand for meaning. Precious knew she had to act. With Dr. Thorne's help, now an ally from afar, she arranged a video conference with the consortium. She could not speak to them, so she prepared a presentation of her drawings and videos of the village, showing the intimate, careful relationship they had with their field. She showed the burned patch of land from the sacrifice they had made, a powerful image of the cost of true stewardship. Her message, translated by her aide, was clear: the whisper cannot be industrialized. It is not a tool to be used, but a relationship to be nurtured. You cannot hear the millet if you see it only as a commodity. She argued that their method was about quality of attention, not quantity of data, and that scaling it would destroy the very connection it relied upon. The wisdom of the village elders stood with Precious point one by one. They spoke to the consortium's representatives. They spoke of the time the millet warned of the drought, of the sacrifice of the contaminated crop, of the children learning the language of the land. They spoke not of yield percentages, but of respect, balance, and community. They presented a different definition of wealth, one measured in resilience and harmony, not just bushels per acre. The businessman on the screen listened, initially impatient, then with growing curiosity. They had never considered agriculture in this way. The raw, heartfelt conviction of the villagers, channeled through the silent strength of Precious, was a force their charts and graphs could not counter. They had come seeking a technology and were being offered a philosophy, a compromise of principle. The consortium, surprisingly, did not leave in anger. They were challenged and intrigued. After much discussion, a new proposal emerged. Instead of industrializing the method, they would fund a foundation, led by the people of Camelot and advised by Dr. Thorne, to teach its principles to small farming communities worldwide. It would be about empowerment, not takeover. They agreed to use their resources to support sustainable practices, not undermine them. It was a hard-won compromise that protected the spirit of the Whispering Millet. Precious had not only saved her village's land but had also protected its soul from being consumed by the very world it sought to inspire. The eternal field Precious, now a woman of great renown, still walked the fields every day. With Lira by her side, she continued the quiet work of listening. The millet whispered its ancient secrets, now heard and respected by an entire village and echoed in communities across the world. The field was eternal, its language timeless, its lessons infinite for those who would approach it with a quiet heart and open hands. She felt the vibrations of a coming rain, a gentle, promising tremor. She smiled, placing a hand on Lira's shoulder and pointing to the specific way the stalks were beginning to dance. Lira closed her eyes, concentrating, and then nodded, a smile of understanding gracing her own face. The conversation continued. The legacy was secure. The symphony of connection, the story of the Whispering Millet, became a testament to the profound connection between humanity and nature. It showed that communication exists in countless forms, far beyond spoken language, and that the greatest wisdom often comes from listening to the quietest voices. It was a story about how a perceived weakness can become our greatest strength, and how true progress is not about conquering nature, but about learning to dance with it. In Camelot, the wind still danced through the towering golden stalks, but it was no longer a mystery. It was a symphony, and every villager, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, had learned to hear its music. They lived their lives in rhythm with the earth, a constant, beautiful dance of mutual care and respect. The unending whisper, and so, the millet continues to whisper. It whispers to the rising sun and the setting moon. It whispers of coming rains and passing winds, of healthy soil and hidden threats. It whispers to anyone who is willing to be still, to feel, and to listen. In a world that is often too loud, the quietest voice can hold the most important truth. The mute girl and the whispering field remind us that the earth is always speaking, sharing its secrets, offering its wisdom. The connection is always there, thrumming just beneath the surface, waiting for the next willing heart to tune into its ancient, life-sustaining frequency. The whisper is unending. The question is, will we listen? Decades flowed over the village of Camelot like a gentle stream, each season adding its own layer to the rich tapestry of their lives. Precious, her hair now the silver of moonlight on the millet stalks, still walked the fields each dawn, though her steps were slower, her touch more reverent. She was no longer the sole wind whisperer, but the elder guide in a community of listeners. Lira, now a woman with children of her own, walked beside her, her own sensitivity honed to a fine point, capable of discerning the subtlest shifts in the hum of the earth. The village had prospered, not in grand monuments or great wealth, but in a profound and unshakable resilience. They had weathered storms and droughts that crippled other regions, guided by the ever-present whisper of the land. The foundation born from the confrontation with the faraway consortium had flourished, creating a global network of communities who shared the same core belief. To farm was to enter into a conversation, not a command. Travelers from distant continents would make pilgrimages to Camelot, not to see a spectacle, but to sit in silence at the edge of the field and learn how to listen. On one such evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold and violet, Precious sat on her favorite rock, the one where she had first felt the whisper as a girl. A young visitor from a parched land sat next to her, struggling to quiet his busy mind. Precious, her eyes holding the deep peace of a lifetime of listening, simply reached out and gently placed his palm flat against the sturdy base of a millet stalk. She closed her eyes, and he followed suit. For a long time, there was only the feeling of the cool earth and the sturdy plant. And then, a breeze stirred. It moved through the field, and the visitor felt it. A vibration, a faint, rhythmic pulse that traveled from the roots, up the stalk, and into his very bones. It wasn't a word, but it was a feeling of contentment, of equilibrium, of a system in perfect, quiet harmony. His eyes flew open, wide with wonder. Precious smiled, a gesture that needed no translation. He had heard it. He had understood the first word of an infinite language. The whisper would go on, carried on the wind, from one generation to the next, an eternal song between the earth and those who call it home. The story of Precious and the Whispering Millet is more than a fable. It is an invitation. It asks us to consider the profound dialogues happening all around us, in the rustle of leaves, the pattern of birds in flight, and the feel of the soil beneath our feet. In our modern world of constant noise and digital distraction, we have, like the villagers of Camelot before Precious, forgotten how to listen to the oldest language of all. You don't need a field of golden millet to begin. You only need a moment of intentional stillness. Step outside. Find a patch of grass, a single tree, a houseplant on your windowsill. Place your hand on its leaves or the earth that sustains it. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Don't listen for words, but for feeling. Feel the sun, the breeze, the subtle pulse of life that connects all living things. Become a student of your environment. Notice what the behavior of the animals, the shift in the clouds, and the condition of the plants in your local park are telling you. What wisdom have we overlooked in our rush to dominate nature, rather than partner with it? Share what you discover. Talk about the peace found in quiet observation. Teach a child the name of a local bird or the story a particular cloud formation tells. Advocate for the green spaces in your community, for they are our classrooms for this ancient language. Precious's world was transformed not by a loud proclamation, but by a quiet revelation. Our planet is whispering to us stories of change, of need, of incredible beauty and delicate balance. It is sharing its secrets. The question is, will we be silent enough to hear them?